Hello, everyone, and a good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nikki Hamblin. I'm an Olympian and member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first ITA monthly webinar of 2022, Building Clean Sport Communities. Before I introduce our topic and our panelists, please allow me to do some housekeeping. A reminder that we are delivering this webinar in 5 languages. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. By clicking on this icon, you can select a channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting this session in English, but you can also listen to the audio in Arabic, French, Russian, or Spanish. Just as a little FYI, our French interpreter is having a few issues with connecting, but we hope that he can join us soon. Some other housekeeping points. Please do use the chat function to tell us your name, where you're from, and your sport or role. You can write in English or one of the languages that we have for translation today. I can see that our regulars have already started saying hi in the chat box. So hi to Ricardo from Florida in the US. Hello to Dino from Brazil. Good morning to Mohammed in Iran. So welcome to you all. Finally, note that we record all of our webinars so we can make them available on our website and YouTube channel for those who are unable to make the live session. Today's webinar is part of our monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. A big thank you to those of you who tuned in during 2021 and a big welcome to anyone participating for the first time. We're really happy to have you here with us today. A few more shout outs. Hi Gobi, great to see you. Leon from Guyana, and I think I saw Armando say hi to me as well, so welcome to you all. It is my pleasure to introduce our official presenting partner for the second year, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver the webinar program free of charge in 5 different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch test products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage all athletes and athlete support personnel, particularly those who are on their way to the Beijing Olympics this week, to check all products before use at sport.wetestYoutrust.com. The ITA is proud to be recognised by UNESCO as a leading international organisation for the delivery of anti-doping programs. This educational webinar is delivered with the support of the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. This is our second year of the ITA monthly webinars. As you know, in 2021, we focused on key topics in anti-doping, such as supplements, the legal side, and the prohibited list. For 2022, we're changing this up a little bit and moving this series to alternating between the key topics to make sure you stay informed and updated, and values and sport community webinar discussions. Today's topic is building clean sport communities, which is our first panel discussion. We will talk about the importance of clean sport community and how, in whatever role you have, you can make a valuable contribution to ensuring your environment is doping-free. I would like to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and offer a huge welcome to them today. Our panelists have all demonstrated a strong and unwavering commitment to clean sport and are here with us to share their knowledge and experiences to explain why we should and how we can be part of building a clean sport community. Andrew Hayes is a doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham, an international level distance runner, a member of the UK Anti-Doping and UK Athletics Athlete Commissions, and a recent addition to the wider social science research expert advisory group. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks very much for having me. Absolute pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on board. Our second panelist today is Dr. Aya Nakitanda, the President of the Uganda National Anti-Doping Organization, the member country representative and chair of the Education Committee at the Africa Zone 5 Regional Anti-Doping Organization, a member of the Association of the Olympic Committees of Africa Medical and Anti-Doping Commission, a member of the Commonwealth Games Federation Medical and Anti-Doping Committee, and an Olympian in the sport of swimming. Hi, Aya.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for the introduction and to ITA for inviting me to speak today. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Our third, but definitely not our least panelist, is Jared Tallad, an Australian race walker. He is an Olympic champion in the 50-kilometre walk from London 2012. He is a 4-time Olympic medalist, a 3-time World Championship medalist, and holds the Olympic record in the 50-kilometre walk. Since his retirement, he has moved into a coaching role through the Athletics Australia Athlete to Coach program. Hi, Jared.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be a part of the webinar today. I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks.
Awesome. So as you've heard with the introductions, the expertise and accolades of this group is truly phenomenal. So I encourage you to ask any questions you may have using the Q&A function, and we will address these at the end of the webinar. To begin our webinar, I would like to ask you, the audience, to use the chat function and write what clean sport means to you. So please go ahead and find the chat box and write in your answers. Just to add some more shout outs, Aya, you've got a specific shout out there from someone who claims you as their own. And we've got some responses coming in to what is clean sport. So fairness, fair playing ground, free from doping and abuse, equal opportunity, healthy and fair sport and life, more equal opportunities, fairness, integrity, honouring sport values, results that are determined by effort, respect for yourself and others, and a no doping environment. So as you can see, clean sport can mean many different things to different people. And I'll now hand over to Andrew to explain why this is and what challenges can come from us defining it differently.
Thank you, Nikki. Just reading a few of the answers there, and it is brilliant to see what people are coming up with. And I suppose that plays into sort of some of the challenges we face here. So to give a little bit of a background from the research perspective is that predominantly for the past sort of 20, 30 years, there's been a focus on anti-doping or doping and the drivers behind why athletes or their environment sort of lead them to choose to dope. But we've seen sort of a bit of a change recently, and sort of a more focus on what clean sport is and what clean sport behaviours are. Problem is that's been quite poorly defined. So for many athletes, it's the reason why it is partly sort of quite poorly defined is the fact that most people don't actually think about this day to day. They don't reflect on this. It's essentially the norm for them. It's something that comes naturally, and it's not something they actively sort of engage with day to day, because that is just simply their approach to sport and sort of the rules that govern competition. And what's really interesting seeing some of the answers that have come through is that for many, clean sport isn't just drug-free sport. It's wider than that. It's a sort of a larger integrity issue about values, fair play. I've seen fairness put down, respecting competition, respecting the rules. So there's a large body of research now that's sort of suggesting that it is bigger than just anti-doping and drug-free sport. It's athlete support personnel and coaches want to compete in an environment where we're free from cheating, and that might be several different things and mean several different things to different people. Doping obviously becomes part of that, and I think it's individuals' values and identities and behaviours that are really important here, and they all play a role in how people sort of perceive clean sport and clean sport behaviours and how they approach competition. So it's highly individual. Idiosyncratic is one of the words that we came up with when we were doing some of the research. It means different things to different people, but everyone's sort of drawn together by respecting the rules. So that's sort of the key thing. It's a bigger integrity issue than anti-doping, and it's just a larger integrity issues than were sort of considered in the past.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you, clean sport is individual, but there are definitely commonalities within how people understand it. So we can all build this community based on, I guess, underpinning similar values.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really good way of summarizing it, in that underpinning values from an anti-doping perspective is a really interesting sort of point to make, in that a lot of these values that bring people into sport in the first place come from early life experiences, either from parents, from coaches, from education. So people come into sport with strong values of fairness, of fair play, of equality and respect. And I think there's a real opportunity for clean sport education and anti-doping education to reinforce that, because those values are already there for a lot of people. So there's an opportunity to sort of build on that and build these communities where sport is an environment in which people respect the rules, respect their competitors, and have an opportunity to compete in a clean environment.
Well, thank you for the explanation. And just so the audience knows, Andrew has published some really great papers on this topic, which we have included a link to at the end of this, of the end slides. So now to bring our Olympians into the discussion, Aya, it would be great if you could tell us what clean sport and being clean means to you.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Andrew, for the discussion. Clean sport means a lot to me, actually, and I'm glad that we are starting today's webinar with this discussion. Much as I know that the focus of the ITA and this webinar is on doping, I see this as an opportunity for us to reflect on the fact that clean sport is much bigger than that. And from the answers in the chat, I'm glad that many people see it this way. So for me, sport isn't clean so long as we are excluding certain groups of people from sport for whatever reason. And if athletes are subjected to humiliation, discrimination, or harassment in any forms on and off the field of play. If we are cheating our age to compete in an age group competition, or deliberately losing matches to manipulate draws and competition, it's not clean sport. So for me, issues to do with gender eligibility, competition manipulation, harassment, and abuse are also important aspects of clean sport. But going back to doping, being clean, of course, means you are free from anti-doping rule violation, not because you are found to be clean, because the anti-doping system is not perfect and is not going to catch all the cheaters, but you as a person are deliberate and intentional about being true to yourself and to others. So I think being clean is a personal journey, and you need to be true to yourself.
Thank you, and it's great that you brought in all those other elements. Jared, I see you've got your hand up, but we were coming to you next anyway, so perhaps you can jump in with your contribution and then perhaps talk about what being clean means to you.
Thank you. For me, being a clean athlete is an athlete that believes in integrity, a level playing field for all competitors, that success is only through hard work, determination, persistence, and honesty. And most importantly, respect for your fellow competitor, so your fellow athletes. I'm a clean athlete. I'm proud to be a clean athlete and free from doping. Over time, my opinion on what makes a clean athlete has changed. And nowadays, I also believe a clean athlete is an athlete that's proud to speak about clean sport, whether it be through social media, in the media, or at sporting events, or even wear symbols that promote clean sport. So that's really something I really believe in these days, is to also be a clean athlete, you need to be able to speak out about clean sport and be proud to compete doping free, but also to promote it as well.
Thank you. So research has shown that the athlete entourage is a powerful influence on decision making around doping. As you can see on the screen, coaches and peers who are close and trusted by the athlete can either prevent doping or facilitate doping. So Jared, perhaps staying with you, during your career, who supported you as a clean athlete?
I was very fortunate to train during my career at an elite sports training centre in Australia called the Australian Institute of Sport. Here I was supported by a range of support personnel, be it my coach, physio, sports dietitian, physiologist. There was a whole range of support personnel, but definitely the biggest support I had as a clean athlete was my coach. He was a very big believer in competing fairly and with integrity. At the time when I was competing in my event, in my sport, doping was quite a big problem. And there were certain athletes that I was competing against who were doping, and it was quite obvious that they were doping. And my coach and I definitely made it sort of a us versus them situation where we would always compete and train in the right way. To do this, my coach would always be behind me in utilising the resources that we had at our disposal to find the best methods or ways for us to compete fairly and at our best. And in doing that, be proud of what we achieved, even though that we were going up against some athletes that were doping and cheating. And but we would never falter and never do what they were doing. We were proud in what we were doing and just try to get the best results we could with what we could achieve.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's great that you had that support behind you. And I guess we'll come to that a little bit later to perhaps delve into it a bit more detail about that environmental piece as well. So Aya, does any experience or person come to mind for you when you think about who supported you during your clean sport journey?
Yeah, my experience is very different from Jared's, I should say. To be honest, during the 10 years that I competed for Uganda, I was very oblivious about doping or even clean sport. What I mean is that I loved my sport, I worked hard, and I did my best. So the thought of doping or cheating just never crossed my mind. I also didn't have much contact with doping control or hear about doping cases in my country. So doping was a distant concept far away from my reality. I associated it with the elite of the elite athletes like Lance Armstrong and Marion Jones. I would say my true informed clean athlete journey started only recently when a fellow athlete and friend suggested that I start working with anti-doping because I was a former athlete, a medical doctor, and there was a huge gap in Africa. Even then I was hesitant because I was very skeptical about the global anti-doping system. I think many people here can agree with me that it's still a very common belief that the anti-doping system itself is unfair, that it targets athletes from specific parts of the world. So it took me a lot of learning. I took the IOC postgraduate course on drug use in sport and enlightenment to finally decide to work with anti-doping. I would like to send my cheers to Kadi, my fellow athlete from Beijing 2008, and an African sister from Mali. She must be somewhere in the audience today. Thank you for dragging me into this clean sport journey because I'm now finding it very fulfilling.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that from all the way through what you've done so far. Andrew, coming to you, who supported you?
I'd say my experience was probably a little bit closer to Jared's in that I was very fortunate to be surrounded by coaches and athlete support personnel throughout my career and continue to be, who've always advocated for clean sport and for drug-free sport. And I suppose they really, right from the start, encouraged making clean sport behaviours. Probably wasn't titled that at the time when I was about 13, but making clean sport behaviours part of sort of daily life, and that would be the use of like informed sports check supplements and global drug detect medications, and just sort of having that from an early age really helped me to sort of just embrace that side of anti-doping. I've also just been very fortunate to have role models to look up to in my own athletics club growing up who were competing at a high level and was speaking out against dopers and drug use in sport. And I think what that's sort of driven me throughout my career to gravitate towards people that that share similar values to myself, especially sort of people I want to train with, coaches I want to be associated with, an athlete support person as well. If they share similar values and beliefs towards sport, I think that it's sort of it really strengthens you and creates that community, and that you want to do things in the right way. So it's great to hear Jared's experience and obviously as well Aya's sort of journey to finding yourself at Nardo and how that's developed. It's been really interesting. So thank you for sharing those as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you to all three of you for sharing your experiences. And Aya, I hope you can see the chat box because Katie's just said thank you to you. So as an audience, you may or may not be aware of Jared's story. He initially crossed the line in the silver medal position at the London 2012 Olympic Games. But following doping violations of his competitor, he was subsequently reallocated the gold medal. Instead of having his moment on top of the podium in the Olympic Stadium, he held a gold medal ceremony in his backyard, as we are going to watch now.
And the gold medalist, representing Australia, Jared Tallent.
Athletes are the ones most affected when sport isn't clean. Jared, can you talk about your experience of the impacts of doping as a clean athlete? As I hope this can help us all better understand the importance of why we should all take responsibility to ensure no more athletes miss their moment.
So I competed internationally from 2004 to 2019. During my career, I won 4 Olympic medals, 3 World Championship medals, and 4 World Cup medals. Of those 11 medal ceremonies, I had to redo 5 of those medal ceremonies, and there's still 1 more to come. So in total, I've been on the podium 16 times so far for 11 medals. And obviously the 1 extra practice in the backyard that you just saw then. When you're a clean athlete and you're competing against competitors that are cheating, that are doping, it's extremely heartbreaking to be robbed so many times of your moment in the spotlight. This is the damage that doping does to a clean athlete. I can call myself an Olympic champion, but I didn't know I was an Olympic champion until 4 years after I crossed the finishing line. I actually found out I was an Olympic champion sitting at my kitchen bench, drinking a glass of wine, waiting for the Court of Arbitration to release the hearing result of the final appeal of the athlete who beat me across the line. So I missed all the fanfare that an Olympic champion receives when they return home. So that's what doping does to the clean athlete. So for me, I worked extremely hard for a long time to go to London, compete at my best, to be robbed on the day, and then have to wait an extra 4 years to find out that I was eventually the Olympic champion. So there is a huge cost to what doping does to clean athletes, and it's something that all athletes that make that choice should really think about.
Yeah, I mean, when I watch that backyard ceremony, it makes me so proud. I think, how you feel, I don't know that anyone else feels like this, but how you feel when you well up inside, when you watch someone, having known all the work that you've gone through to get to that point, but then also at the same time, like, how could this happen? And just sadness that you weren't able to have that in the Olympic Stadium, right? And what do you think about it now? Like looking back on it, how was it 4 or 5 years ago? You finally got reallocated this medal. How do you kind of feel about it now?
Yeah, it's definitely some sadness that I didn't get to do it in London on the day. That would have meant so much more. But I think I'm just also very fortunate. There are a lot of athletes in the past that have been cheated that never got the opportunity to be reallocated a medal. So I'm one of the lucky few, and I'm very, very proud of what I achieved. But nothing will ever beat receiving the gold medal on the day. So while the medal ceremony definitely made up for a lot of it, it'll never beat actually winning on the day, crossing the line. So it does make a big difference to the clean athlete for sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing your experience with us. I think it's not often we get to hear these stories in such an open forum, and it's really much appreciated. As I said, like every time I hear a story, especially when it's told in the first person, it really motivates me to continue to try and make a difference, even a small difference, because lots of small differences ultimately will hopefully make big change in going forward. And I expect many members of our audience feel the same. So perhaps we will now talk to Aya about some more of what she's up to. So athlete experience is extremely valuable in doping prevention because to different extents, they have been impacted by doping. We've heard Jared's story, but there's many other stories and not even medal relocation ones. It will be the people that perhaps don't make the final, don't even make the championship. So therefore, it seems logical that athletes should be part of the solution at every level, which is why it's great to have Aya with us today, who can talk about how she brings her athlete perspective into her role as the president of the Uganda NADO.
Thanks, Nikki. I completely agree with you. I think it's really important to include athletes' perspectives in anti-doping programs because ultimately it is the athletes that are affected the most. If athletes have not had any prior anti-doping education, they are traumatized by just being selected for testing and going through the process of doping control, handling sophisticated equipment they've never seen. Anti-doping rules also apply strict liability on athletes, so the burden of responsibility is pretty much on athletes. But being involved in sports leadership and governance now, I've come to realize that there is still a huge lack of awareness on anti-doping in our sports structures. So many administrators do not know about these challenges and have not come to realize the consequences of doping or of the anti-doping process on our athletes. During my days, I kind of got by without consequences, but the situation is different now. Sports is evolving very fast. Participation and performance in sports in Uganda is increasing rapidly. So the needs of athletes today are different from my days. And I feel really privileged to be in a place where I can speak, lobby, and plan for athletes from an informed position and support them in achieving their dreams as clean athletes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure the athletes that you're involved for are really grateful. And perhaps even by speaking today or continuing your roles, they'll be more aware of the work that you do as well, and perhaps see opportunities for themselves in the future. Having kind of explained a little bit about your experience as an athlete and why you came into, I guess, the more administration role, Aya, could you talk about some of the challenges that you do face as a NADO and how you address these or would like to address these?
There are quite many, but I don't want to say it all because it might feel like we are doing nothing. Well, anyway, we are a small country in terms of how much sport we participate in and also the number of athletes that we send to major sports events. For example, for Tokyo 2020, we had just over 30 athletes, and yet we do have Olympic champions and world record holders in our midst. This means that the demands for anti-doping education and testing are quite high relative to the numbers. Yet at the same time, we do not also have an established NADO. So our main problem is that we just do not have the resources to do what we need to do. And because anti-doping is still a relatively new field, there is an overall lack of awareness and capacity, even within the sports sector as a whole. What we are doing is setting priorities and working within our means. For example, we are not doing much grassroots work, but focusing more on ensuring that our top athletes are educated and have prerequisite testing. During the Tokyo Games, we heard about athletes from some countries who were barred from competing due to gaps in their out of competition testing. So this is something we absolutely want to avoid for our athletes competing at the highest level. And at the same time, we continue to increase awareness, not just among athletes and athlete support personnel, but also among administrators at different levels of sports governance. And slowly building anti-doping capacity by training more anti-doping experts, educators, and sample collection personnel. We are really grateful for the support we receive from the National Olympic Committee, from the Africa Zone 5, RADO, WADA, and the Olympic Solidarity for these initiatives.
That's great. I was going to say, when you had a small team, but you have a very successful team. I know there's some very, very good Ugandan athletes who run distance on the track coming from my sport. So yeah, it's great to hear about your experience. And I think it's important to bring your story into this discussion as well, because there will probably be many other people who want to make a difference like you do, but are kind of working within limited means. Next, we'd like to move on to, just to let you know, if you haven't worked it out already, the French interpreter is now online. So if anyone is not listening in French and would like to, you can now access that interpretation. So next, we're going to move on to opportunities for athletes and organisations. So Andrew, you have experience of being involved in the UK anti-doping and UK athletics athlete commissions. So do you have any advice for athletes who want to become more involved in anti-doping? And from your experience, from your research, from your commission work, from your just general being an athlete, what can support greater athlete involvement?
Thanks, Nikki. So I don't want to speak directly on behalf of the commissions that I represent, because I think it'd be unfair to them. So more from my own experience, having been in those commissions. I think what's quite sort of been visible in the past few years is sort of the growth of the athlete voice in a variety of different commissions and organisations across the globe. So I think we're really getting to a point where athletes are becoming more confident and more empowered to actually speak out about important issues. And that's only can be a good thing, really, in terms of having organisations embrace that as well. So athletes are sort of taking it upon themselves to speak out, and that ties into Jared's point about clean athletes and clean sport behaviours, in that the more people that are willing and feeling comfortable about speaking out about anti-doping and clean sport, the better, really, and hopefully that becomes the norm. From the research, we've also found that when we conduct research in collaboration with athletes, and particularly some of the work we've done with elite athletes, is that athletes really value the opportunity to get involved. So once the door was open to them to provide experiences in a safe, confidential environment where they could provide feedback about general concepts such as clean sport, or the WADA code, or how, for our example, the UCAD NARDO is doing, when they're able to provide that feedback, they really value that opportunity. And what we really heard from the research is having athletes collaborate right from the start is just something they really want to get involved in. So there's definitely that that desire to be involved in governance and checking and challenging the people that are really empowering the sport. So as advice, I think there's a variety of commissions, there's a variety of organisations that represent athletes across sports, across integrity issues, particularly in anti-doping. And I think if athletes would like to get involved in that, I think that would be a first sort of base to touch upon, because there's certainly people out there that are willing to champion this. So just opening a conversation with someone that's involved in a commission is a great way to get involved and find out how you could sort of advance your knowledge or sort of just generally get involved. And then looking at educational offerings as well from the different organisations. So from a UK perspective, we can do an anti-doping advisor course and then move on to an educator course to just basically upskill ourselves in knowing more about anti-doping. And I'm sure those are run across the globe. So just look at opportunities to get involved is basically what I'd like to say. And there are people out there already doing this, so you're not alone.
Great, awesome, thank you for that. So although the athlete voice is growing, athletes can often be perhaps reluctant to speak out about doping because they can be fearful of potential social, financial and relational consequences. We've pulled a few quotes together from different athletes and people involved on the screen for you to have a quick read. So Dr. Kelsey Erickson has talked about ongoing personal sacrifice. Athletes such as Cara and Alicia have voiced concerns about how they'll be thought of and perhaps even financial consequences through contracts, for example. And Jorge Leiva, the CEO of INADO, has talked about the courage that it takes for an athlete to speak out as it may affect their existing relationships. So I guess the big question that we need to answer here, and I think that Jared is going to be really helpful here because he kind of alluded to this earlier, but how can we create and foster a culture in which people feel comfortable to speak out? And so Jared, what do you think?
I think it's really important to band together with other athletes. During my career, I teamed up with a group of athletes from all different countries that were all very like-minded, very similar to me, didn't want doping in sport, were very much against it and could see problems that, we thought there were obvious problems in the sport and certain athletes were cheating. So we actually banded together and as a group tried to speak out together. We created a hashtag. We even had one of the guys on the team in our group made t-shirts for us to all wear at championships with the hashtag on the t-shirt. And we did social media together. We tried to speak to the media in our own countries. And it was actually received really well. We thought certain athletes might think, we shouldn't be doing that, but most athletes that we spoke to that didn't want to speak out actually congratulated us. I was even contacted by the International Federation, the National Federation, the National Anti-Doping Body, and they were all very supportive. So I think while some athletes are quite reluctant and think that there might be consequences to the actions, I found anything but. I think there was a lot of support for it. And most organisations, most people are really want to see athletes speak out and be saying the right thing and wanting a doping-free sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's great that you can share that from personal experience, that you as the athlete started something and then organisations perhaps who maybe have a little bit more power at one end of anti-doping in terms of policy and things like that, kind of jumped on board to support you. So it's great to hear that that happened. So one of the concerns that has been mentioned by athletes and athlete support personnel is that if they do speak up, and this is about specific things that they may have seen or they may have heard, is that they have to put their name to this. So we just wanted to add a quick reminder in here to everyone that there are many different platforms which do give you the option to provide information anonymously, including through ITA Reveal. And a quick plug here for our next webinar, because this will be on intelligence and investigations, and we will be talking a lot more about these kind of platforms. And just as a reminder, because we are coming towards the end of our session now, to please put your questions for our panelists in the Q&A box. So perhaps the final section that we will be covering today is that we often, and it's important to acknowledge, that we often only have the perspective of the clean athlete. But there is another side of this. To give an example, and this is just something that I read, something that I came across, and we're not asking anyone to address this directly or anything like that. But over Christmas, I read Yulia Stepanova's biography, and Yulia is quite very well known, definitely in the sport of track and field. She was an international level distance runner, competing in athletics, obviously, and she doped because it was either that or for her to continue to live in poverty. So Andrew, in order to build clean sport communities, do you think it's important to consider that there are different perspectives and not just those of clean athletes?
I think that's a vital question to be considering, really. I think we've already seen a move from a previous focus on anti-doping, drivers of doping, from the research, and there's a growing sort of importance placed on social science research recently, and that's been fantastic. And initially, that's started to look at what does clean sport look like to clean athletes, or self-identified clean athletes, I should say. And so the projects that we've done recently with the Respect Consortium and 5 European NARDOs have looked at. But you're absolutely right in that once we have that sort of information of what does it look like to clean athletes, we also need to be conscious that that's not always the same story, and that we know that there's values and behaviours that individuals may have, but it's also the environment that's a huge influencer in how athletes find their way in sport. There's environmental factors, there's systemic factors that might influence how an athlete sort of is taken down a path. So you may have someone who has arguably clean sport, clean morals in terms of fair play and integrity, but they find themselves in a situation where through implicit or explicit pressure, they choose to dope. And so it's really important that we get their experiences. One thing that sort of does complicate this is, although it's vital moving forward that we understand those perceptions, is that this is often quite a hard to reach group because of the stigma attached to being either someone that has received an ADRV or someone that has cheated in sport. It's quite difficult for them to speak openly about this. But so that's one of the challenges that we face in terms of collecting data from that environment. But it is vital that we understand that perspective and learn more about why an athlete might find themselves in that position.
And Aya, perhaps to bring you into this conversation now, do you have anything to add regarding different perspectives, maybe from an athlete who feels that they don't have a choice, or even someone who has made a genuine mistake because they just lack knowledge?
Definitely, we need to listen to athletes' stories to understand the dynamics that drive athletes into doping. And I'm glad to hear from Andrew that there is increasing research on this. But then at the same time, we also have the results management process that exists to serve this purpose. I think it's well known that power imbalances between athletes and their coaches or managers could result in doping, like Yulia. But just like you mentioned, Nikki, some athletes do make a genuine mistake. We are fortunate to have very few anti-doping rule violations in Uganda, but our last 2 cases have been cases of inadvertent doping in which the athletes took medication containing prohibited substances for a cold just before competition. And in their hearing, it was mentioned and highlighted that they had no prior anti-doping education, which was a lesson for us that more still needs to be done. The ideal is that anti-doping programs deter athletes from doping. We should be preventing doping rather than reacting to anti-doping rule violations. But in contexts like mine, where awareness is still very low, systems are very reactionary. So from a governance perspective, athletes' experiences are really vital for us to justify implementing anti-doping programs and seeking funding for them. To some extent, we lack resources because some stakeholders have not yet come to realize the importance and need to fund these programs. And I believe that building clean sport communities is a development in the right direction, because it's not enough to have empowered athletes. we need more awareness even within sports governance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I kind of love how you finished that with it's everyone. Everyone has to come together to achieve this. Jared, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, it's definitely important to consider other perspectives. I know with the athletes that I was competing against, they came from a culture where I think doping was probably very commonplace, and it had been for a very long time, which is a totally different perspective from where I came from, where from the outset, everyone was against doping. So if you're growing up in a culture where there's a history of it, there are coaches that are wanting athletes to dope, it's a very different situation, and you have to consider that, and we have to think of ways how we can change that for the future, whether that be through education or such. But you definitely have to consider what other athletes go through, and like in Yulia's situation, if it's going to take her out of poverty, you can understand why athletes would choose to dope, and the reasons, that they make.
Yeah, so thank you all for sharing your thoughts on this, which is quite a challenging topic. It's a big question, and a big question about how and what we do about it effectively. So I think any ideas from anyone in the audience, I think welcome. And so we're going to move on to our final question for our panelists. We were hoping that we could include our audience in this through the chat function, but unfortunately, because it wasn't being used as it should have been, we'd have to shut it down. But perhaps as an audience, you can just have a think about this question, like how do you build a clean sport community? Perhaps you can think about it, perhaps discuss it with fellow athletes, fellow administrators, coaches next time you see them. So what we wanted to ask was to our panelists, kind of moving this into a practical element. So how do you build a clean sport community? And Andrew, I would like to put this to you first, please.
That's a big question, isn't it? I think
top tip then.
Top tip. I think athletes want to be involved. They really want to be involved, and it's just providing the opportunity for them to do that, the process, and that might be coming from NARDOs or governing bodies, allowing athletes that space to open up and provide feedback. Just reach out, because these are the people that are living it day to day and have the experience of competing in this environment, and the obligations they have as clean athletes, be it completing add-ons or checking medications and supplements. So they want to be involved, and they have so much to offer. As for athletes, in terms of being in a clean sport community, I think just staying true and reflecting on your values as to why you're involved in sport is really important. Because for so many, when we've interviewed them and held focus groups, it's all been about the enjoyment of the process and the enjoyment of sport in general, rather than the actual outcome. Obviously, that's fantastic if you're winning medals, but I think a lot of what drives us to be involved in sport is just enjoyment, and that links itself very nicely to being sort of involved in clean sport.
Yeah, thank you. And Aya, what would your advice be?
So my advice is quite simple. Whatever your role as athletes, coaches, managers, technical officials, administrators, or even parents, I believe in taking our own initiatives to empower ourselves. Fortunately, there are lots of free online resources out there from WADA, from the ITA and international federations. So if you do not have opportunities for anti-doping education in your country, you can try them out. You can try these out. Once you're empowered, then go out there and influence others, empower others. That way, I think we can build clean sport communities.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're a great role model for that. So yeah, thank you. And Jared, from your experience, what would be your takeaway messages?
Big one for me is to not be afraid to speak out if you're willing to speak out about doping. You'll find that most people are very supportive, and organisations will be very supportive of you, so don't be afraid. use social media, use the media, use different ways and different methods to promote clean sport and clean sport communities, and also share past experiences. So I, even though what happened to me and the experiences that I went through, I'm always willing to share what happened to me to make the future better for athletes that come in the future. So I don't want to see what happened to me happen to anyone else. So share those past experiences. That's really, really important.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I think watching that video, you sharing your story from the first person, I think, yeah, should have, or it's definitely impacted me, and I hope our audience as well. So that wraps up our panelist discussion. If you would like to learn more about this topic, we have linked some resources to the presentation for your future reading or viewing, and you'll get these slides at the end of the session. So now we're going to go to the Q&A and address some questions from the audience. So we have a question from Mike Cook. And so perhaps I'll just read it, and then maybe Andrew, you can take the first stab at addressing it, and then Jared and I, please jump in. So in gymnastics, for most international competitions, national federations are required to send a judge as part of the official delegation. This practice has led to some pressure on the judges to favour athletes from their own federation. How can sport move away from a system that encourages such favouritism? Tough question, but let's have a go.
Can't believe you give me this first. I generally don't really know where to start with this. That's quite a complicated one. So just
Jared, do you want to help Andrew out here?
Okay, I could try.
I was going to say my sport, it's also judged. So, and I think they do it quite well, where they have a international panel of only a certain number of judges that judge at all the major international competitions. And even though they are from different countries, it's quite a competitive environment to become one of those judges. So, and they go through a rigorous selection process. So I think the way that's done, it makes it more fair, because the judges are competing against themselves to be part of this panel. So even though they're from different countries, they're competing to get into this panel, and then they have to act in the best interests of all the athletes. So it works quite well.
And Aya, do you want to add?
So my take is that probably the International Federation needs to look into how they could have more officials from different countries to sort of increase participation and inclusion of officials from different countries. And that means that they need to take steps to train and certify more people in different parts of the world.
Andrew, did anything come to mind that you would like to add, or do you think Jared and I did a good job? Well, they did do a good job.
I've just been writing down notes from what Jared and I have said, going, that's fantastic. So I think they've answered it as far better than I could have.
Awesome. And so our next question comes from Dr. Suman. So thank you so much for a wonderful session. I would like to ask how we can ensure an aspect of clean sports in every discipline. So perhaps, maybe you could answer this one, because maybe we could take the question about the different aspects, because you talked about clean sport not just being anti-doping, but other integrity issues as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really broad, but I would go back to my final advice, that you need to take the initiative sort of to look for resources and empower yourself, because it's really interesting that currently we have lots of online resources, and it's not just on anti-doping. If you go to the IOC website, for example, or different international federations, you'll find that they have lots of resources relating to some of the issues we discussed, not only on anti-doping, but also gender eligibility, competition manipulation, and harassment and abuse in sport.
Thank you. We're almost time to wrap up. I'm just going to take one more question from Laurie Mack, and I'm going to attempt to answer this myself. Are there universal anti-doping awareness programs available that we can access? So I would say yes. The ITA has lots of resources available for anyone to use. There's also obviously resources through the World Anti-Doping Agency. My advice would be just to go on the IT website, go on the WADA website, and see what you can find. And if you have any questions, if you have anything missing, if you're looking for something specific, please reach out and send us an email. We'll be more than happy to get back to you with something specific. So given we're nearly at our hour mark, if you still do have questions, please email them to education@ita.sport. We will answer everything that you send us. And this wraps up today's webinar. I'd like to say a big thank you to Andrew, Aya, and Jared. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for being so open with us today. It's been great. And of course, a big thank you to our audience for your attention. We hope that you found this session valuable. So after the webinar ends, you will receive a link to a survey along with the presentation slides. We ask that you do take a couple of minutes to complete the survey so we can figure out what you want next time and how we can improve the next time. If you would like to receive updates from the ITA, including information about future webinars, please sign up using the link that you will find on the slide. Just a quick plug for our next webinar. It will be on Wednesday, the 23rd of February on intelligence and investigations. We do hope that you'll be able to join us. So thank you once again, and I wish everyone a great rest of your day.